Be me not a tech bro, not a startup guru, just a guy, Nolan. For about 10 years, I'd been working at a company that made highly specific, extremely boring software for the logistics industry. Think inventory management, shipping manifests, warehouse optimization. The kind of stuff that makes the modern world function, but puts you to sleep if you talk about it at a party. The office had the soul of a beige filing cabinet, but it was stable. We were profitable. Very profitable. Life was predictable. I get in, I write code, I fix bugs, I go home. The pay was good, the work was challenging enough, and the people were competent. At the top of this well-oiled, boring machine were two guys who were legends in their own right. First, there was Justin, our head of engineering. Justin looked like he'd been coded into existence himself. He wore the same gray polo shirt every day, had glasses perched on the end of his nose, and communicated mostly through grunts and highly technical analogies. He wasn't a manager in the modern sense. He didn't do walking meetings or talk about synergy. But if a server farm in Ohio went down at 3 a.m., he'd be the one to remote in from his basement, type 1,000 lines of code that looked like gibberish to everyone else, and have the entire system back online before the first shift warehouse workers even noticed. He built our entire back end from scratch. He was the architect, the plumber, and the god of our digital world. The younger guys were terrified of him, but they respected him because they knew he was the real deal. Then you had Blake, the head of sales. Blake was the complete opposite of Justin. He was all charisma and handshakes. He probably didn't know the difference between Java and JavaScript, but he knew the names of every client's kids and their dog's birthday. He was the guy who could turn a cold call into a 7-figure contract over a round of golf. He'd been with the company since the beginning, and something like 80% of our revenue came from relationships he had personally built over 2 decades. He remembered that one client's son was graduating from college and sent a gift. He knew another client was a huge fan of a niche sports team and would send him articles about them. These two guys, the stoic genius and the charismatic rainmaker, were the twin pillars holding the whole company up. Everything changed when the founder and old CEO decided to retire. He was a decent old guy, started the company in his garage, the whole classic story. He cashed out, bought a boat, and sailed off into the sunset. The board of directors, a collection of investors who mostly left us alone as long as the checks cleared, decided it was time to modernize. They wanted to make the company more appealing, more dynamic. They wanted a new face, someone who could take us from a boring but profitable software company to a disruptive tech innovator. Cue the ominous music. A few weeks later, they announced the new CEO. Her name was Alina. She came from some flashy marketing firm on the coast. Her professional headshot was all bright lights and a power pose. Her resume was packed with buzzwords. The day she arrived was like a weather front moving in. The entire atmosphere of the office shifted. She called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. Alina stood at the front, radiating an almost aggressive level of confidence. She was polished, articulate, and used her hands a lot when she talked. Her speech was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense. It was all about shifting paradigms, leveraging our core competencies, and fostering a new culture of inclusivity and innovation. She said the company had been successful, yes, but it lacked a soul. It lacked vibrancy. She wanted to break down the old, rigid hierarchies and create a more collaborative, open environment. I looked over at Justin, who was standing in the back with his arms crossed. He looked like he was trying to solve a complex math problem in his head, and the problem was the woman speaking. Blake was near the front, smiling and nodding politely, but his eyes weren't smiling. It was the same look he got when a client was trying to lie to him about their budget. The speech ended with a promise to reevaluate everything and to build a company that reflected the world we live in today. Some of the younger employees, especially from the non-technical departments, were eating it up. They were clapping, looking inspired. The rest of us, the ones who actually built and maintained the product, just felt a cold dread. The reevaluation phase began almost immediately. Alina started having one-on-one meetings with department heads. Then, the rumors started. Whispers in the break room, hushed conversations by the coffee machine. Alina thought the engineering department was a boys' club. She felt the sales strategy was too reliant on outdated relationship-based models. She believed the company's culture was suffering from deeply ingrained male toxicity. It was all very vague and impossible to argue against. How do you prove your department isn't a boys' club? How do you defend a sales record that speaks for itself against an accusation of being outdated? The hammer fell about a month after she started. It was a Tuesday, I think. An email went out from HR at 10 a.m. A mandatory all-hands meeting in 1 hour. No agenda specified. That's never a good sign. I walked past Justin's office on the way to the meeting. It was empty. His keyboard was unplugged. His second monitor was dark. A little potted cactus he'd had for years was gone. My stomach sank. In the conference room, Alina stood at the podium, flanked by a woman I'd never seen before. She started the meeting with more corporate platitudes. Embracing change, a bold new chapter, etc. Then she got to it. She announced a major leadership restructuring. Justin and Blake were no longer with the company. There was a collective, sharp intake of breath in the room. It was dead silent. She thanked them for their years of service in a tone that sounded like she was reading a weather report. She said the company needed fresh perspectives and leaders who were aligned with our new cultural vision. There was no Q&A. The meeting was over in 5 minutes. People just kind of shuffled back to their desks in a state of shock. The two pillars of the company gone, in an instant. An hour later, we got the follow-up email introducing the new leadership. The woman who had been standing next to Alina was Abigail. She was the new head of HR. A quick search revealed her background was in corporate wellness and life coaching. And the new joint head of sales and marketing? A woman named Kaylee. Kaylee, it turned out, was a personal friend of Alina's. Her entire professional experience consisted of running the social media accounts for a boutique clothing brand. The new head of engineering was an external hire who wouldn't be starting for another month. In the interim, the department was to report directly to Alina. That afternoon, I saw Blake being escorted out of the building by a security guard. He wasn't carrying a box, just his coat. He looked straight ahead, his face like stone, completely professional even in that moment of ultimate humiliation. He had given 20 years of his life to this place. The first changes under the new regime were cultural. Abigail, the new HR head, immediately rolled out a series of mandatory weekly workshops. The topics were things like unpacking unconscious bias and fostering psychological safety. In practice, they were 2-hour sessions where Abigail would talk in circles using therapy speak, and we'd have to do awkward role-playing exercises. The underlying message was always the same. The company's old culture was problematic, and the male employees were the primary source of the problem. We were told our communication style could be perceived as aggressive, that we needed to be more emotionally available in our professional interactions. It was exhausting. Productivity plummeted on workshop days because nobody could get any real work done. Meanwhile, Kaylee, the new sales and marketing chief, was on a rebranding spree. She declared our old logo aggressively masculine and spent what must have been a fortune hiring a design firm to create a new one. The result was a pastel-colored swoosh that looked like something you'd see on a box of herbal tea. She also redesigned the office. Our functional gray desks were replaced with open-plan benches and collaboration zones filled with beanbag chairs. She had a neon sign installed in the lobby that said "Good Vibes Only." The sales team was in chaos. Blake had managed his team through a deep understanding of the market and personal mentorship. Kaylee managed them through motivational quotes and a color-coded synergy board. She told the seasoned sales guys, who were used to dealing with grizzled shipping executives, to focus on building a brand narrative on social media. The first big test of the new system came a few weeks later. One of our biggest clients, a massive national freight company, had a critical system failure. Their entire logistics network was paralyzed. This was a code red situation. In the old days, Justin would have been all over it. He'd have the right people on a call, he'd be diagnosing the problem, and he'd have a fix deployed within an hour, tops. But Justin was gone. The interim leadership was useless. Alina herself got on the emergency call and just started asking the client how the situation made them feel. The client, a guy who probably ate gravel for breakfast, was not impressed. He just kept yelling, "My trucks are sitting idle. It's costing me $100,000 an hour. Fix it." My team, the guys who were actually in the trenches, knew what to do. But we were locked out of the highest level admin permissions. Justin had held those keys, and he was the only one who truly understood the system's deepest architecture. His documentation was perfect, but it was like reading a blueprint for a nuclear reactor. You couldn't just hand it to someone and expect them to get it. The outage lasted for 8 hours. 8. We finally got it fixed by bringing in an incredibly expensive outside consultant who basically just followed Justin's old emergency protocols. The client was furious. We had violated our service level agreement by a mile. They were threatening to sue. The next day, Alina held another all-hands meeting. I expected an apology, an explanation. Instead, she blamed the entire incident on outdated and poorly documented legacy systems. She said it was a clear example of the technical debt left behind by the previous leadership. She didn't use Justin's name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. A guy on my team, one of our best senior engineers, stood up and said, "That's not true. The documentation is perfect. We just didn't have the permissions to implement the fix." Alina's face went cold. She looked at him and said, "We don't foster a culture of blame here. We're focused on moving forward." That engineer submitted his resignation the next day. He was the first of many. The second pillar, sales, began to crumble not long after. Another one of our biggest accounts, a multi-million-dollar annual contract, was up for renewal. This was one of Blake's personal clients. He'd been handling their renewal for a decade. It was usually a formality, a dinner and a handshake. Kaylee decided she would handle it personally to build a new kind of client relationship. She got on a video call with the CEO of the client company. One of the sales guys who was on the call told me the whole story later, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. He said Kaylee started the call by talking about the company's new brand journey and how excited she was about their shared values. The client's CEO, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, just cut her off and said, "That's nice. Let's talk numbers. I see you're proposing a 10% price increase." Kaylee was completely unprepared. She couldn't justify the price hike with performance metrics or new features. Instead, she tried to explain that the increase reflected our renewed commitment to sustainability and corporate social responsibility. The client's CEO was silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "I'm not paying for your corporate responsibility. I'm paying for software that works. Your system was down for 8 hours last month. You're lucky I'm even taking this call." Kaylee apparently started fumbling, talking about the challenges of transitioning and how they were building a more robust future. The CEO cut her off again. "I've already spoken with your competitor. They're offering me a better price and a guaranteed uptime. I've also spoken with Blake. He started his own consulting firm. He's going to help us with the transition." And with that, She ended the call, just like that. A multi-million-dollar client gone, poached by the very man they had humiliated and thrown out. When the news spread through the office, the mood turned funereal. This wasn't just a hiccup anymore. This was a 5-alarm fire. We were losing our best engineers. We were losing our biggest clients. The company was actively bleeding. Alina's response was to double down. She sent out a company-wide memo. The memo didn't mention the lost client. Instead, it talked about the exciting challenge of re-engaging the marketplace with our new vision. It blamed the recent headwinds on market resistance to change and the lingering effects of a toxic, sales-at-all-costs culture. It was completely detached from reality. It was like the captain of the Titanic sending a memo about how exciting it is to be testing the ship's buoyancy. The remaining good people started updating their resumes. You could feel it. The quiet hum of competence that had defined the company for years was gone. It was replaced by a mixture of panic, absurdity, and gallows humor. We all knew where this was heading. I decided to stay. I don't know why. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe I'd been there so long it felt like my ship to go down with. I wanted to see the end. And that was all in the first couple of months. The real fireworks, the grand finale of the whole circus, hadn't even started yet. We still had the quarterly financial report to look forward to. The weeks leading up to the quarterly report were surreal. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash where the driver is smiling and talking about how great the scenery is. Abigail's HR initiatives went into overdrive. We now had mandatory Mindfulness Mondays. This was an hour blocked out on everyone's calendar where we were supposed to sit in a conference room with the lights dimmed while Abigail played a recording of ocean sounds and guided us through a meditation. Most of the engineers just sat there with their eyes open, mentally debugging code. It was the most stressful relaxation I've ever experienced. She also implemented an anonymous feedback portal. In theory, it was for constructive criticism. In reality, it became a weapon. People would get called into meetings with Abigail over things like their tone in an email or for exhibiting dismissive body language during a presentation. It was all completely subjective and impossible to defend against. A colleague of mine was written up because he sighed during a meeting. It was flagged in the feedback portal as creating a negative energy field. I am not making that up. The office became a minefield of unspoken rules. People stopped talking to each other in the hallways. Every conversation felt risky. Meanwhile, Kaylee was burning through the marketing budget like it was a personal challenge. She decided our target audience wasn't middle-aged logistics managers anymore. It was the next generation of supply chain innovators. To reach them, she launched a TikTok channel. She hired a team of young, trendy video creators to make short clips about our enterprise-level inventory management software. The videos were baffling. One was a dance challenge using a barcode scanner as a prop. Another was a lip-sync video where an actor pretended to be a shipping pallet talking about its feelings. It was profoundly, deeply cringe-inducing, and it generated exactly 0 sales leads. But it got a lot of views, so Kaylee presented it as a massive success. She also spent a ridiculous amount of money on a launch party for our new brand identity. She rented out an art gallery, hired a DJ, and had caterers serving tiny, unidentifiable food on slate plates. Almost no clients showed up. It was just our own increasingly miserable employees standing around awkwardly, plus a bunch of Kali and Alina's friends from outside the company. The whole time, the actual product was deteriorating. My team was now a skeleton crew. We had lost our best people. The ones who remained were overworked, stressed, and completely demoralized. Little bugs and glitches were starting to pop up all over the system. Things that would have been caught and fixed in a day under Justin were now lingering for weeks. Our response time to customer support tickets went through the roof. We were patching holes in a sinking ship with duct tape. I tried to raise the alarm. I put together a detailed report showing the decline in system stability, the increase in critical errors, and the urgent need to hire experienced engineers to replace the ones who had left. I requested a meeting with Alina to present my findings. Her assistant told me her calendar was booked for the next 6 weeks, but I could meet with Kaylee. So I sat down with Kaylee in one of the new collaboration pods. I walked her through the data, the charts showing a clear downward trend in every key performance metric of our software. She looked at the report, nodded slowly, and then said, "I see the numbers, Nolan, but what's the story here? I'm not feeling the narrative." I was speechless. I told her the story was that our product was breaking and our customers were getting angry. She tapped her pen on my report. "Okay, but that's a negative story. We need to reframe this. Instead of system instability, let's call it unplanned flexibility. Instead of bugs, let's call them undocumented features." She was completely serious. She then told me that the real priority wasn't fixing the old system, but developing a blue sky project she and Alina had dreamed up. It was some vague idea about integrating blockchain and AI into our platform. It had no clear purpose, no business plan, and was technically impossible with our current infrastructure. It was pure fantasy, but it was what they were excited about. I left that meeting knowing, with absolute certainty, that the company was doomed. They weren't just incompetent, they were actively hostile to reality. The atmosphere in the office grew darker. The empty desks of former colleagues were like missing teeth in a grim smile. The remaining sales guys were drinking their lunch. The finance department looked like they were perpetually attending a wake. Alina, Kaylee, and Abigail seemed to exist in a different dimension. They were always laughing, walking around the office with smoothies, talking about their weekend plans. They would huddle together in Alina's glass-walled office, which Kaylee had redecorated with throw pillows and a big fluffy rug. They had created their own little bubble, and the sounds of the company collapsing couldn't penetrate it. Finally, the day of the quarterly board meeting arrived. You could feel the tension in the air. It was a heavy, static charge. The board members started to arrive in the morning. They were mostly older men in serious, expensive suits. They didn't smile. They walked through our newly vibrant office with expressions of quiet concern, looking at the beanbag chairs and the neon sign like they were artifacts from another planet. They filed into the main boardroom, the one reserved for the most important meetings. Alina walked in with Kaylee and Abigail, all of them looking confident and cheerful. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. I was at my desk, trying to work, but mostly just staring at the closed boardroom door, when a friend of mine from the finance department, a guy named Sam, sent me a message. Sam was one of the good ones, a quiet, numbers-obsessed guy who had been with the company for 15 years. His message just said, "The numbers are in. It's a bloodbath." A few minutes later, he messaged again. "She's starting the presentation." For the next hour, there was silence. Then, through the thick, soundproof door of the boardroom, I heard a muffled but distinct sound. It was a raised voice, Alina's voice. It wasn't the calm, confident tone she used in meetings. It was sharp, high-pitched. Then another voice, a low, male rumble, cut her off. Then Alina's voice again, louder this time, shrill. Something was going very, very wrong in there. Everyone in the main office area had stopped working. We were all just frozen, listening. The meeting ended 45 minutes early. The door opened, and the board members filed out. Their faces were grim. One of them was shaking his head slowly. They didn't look at anyone. They just walked straight to the elevators. A few minutes later, Sam came out. He walked over to my desk. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly. "You are not going to believe what just happened," he whispered. He told me everything. Alina had started the presentation, with a 10-minute video produced by Kaylee's team. It was full of slick graphics, upbeat music, and clips of their TikToks. It was all about the new energy and brand engagement. When the video finished, she put up a slide showing our social media metrics. Follower counts were up, engagement was up. She presented this as a major victory. Then the chairman of the board, a notoriously tough, old-school industrialist, had interrupted her. He hadn't been angry. He had been ice cold. He told her to put the real numbers on the screen. Revenue, profit, customer retention. Alina seemed flustered, but she switched to the financial slides. Sam said the room went completely silent. Revenue hadn't just dipped. It had fallen off a cliff, down over 40% for the quarter. We weren't just unprofitable. We had burned through nearly all of the company's cash reserves. We were weeks away from not being able to make payroll. Customer retention was the worst in the company's history. We were losing customers faster than we could count. The chairman let the numbers hang in the air for a moment. Then he asked a very simple question. "Can you explain this?" And that's when Alina lost it. According to Sam, it started with excuses. She blamed the numbers on the economic climate. She blamed them on the turbulent transition. The chairman wasn't buying it. He pointed out that our direct competitors were all seeing record growth. It wasn't the economy, it was us. He then brought up the loss of the 2 major clients. He asked her to explain the 8-hour system outage. Alina's composure started to crack. She abandoned the corporate speak and went on the attack. She said the board couldn't possibly understand the nuances of building a modern, progressive workplace. She claimed the outage was a direct result of the deliberately confusing and undocumented mess that Justin had left behind. She said the big client had left because Blake had an unethical and inappropriately close relationship with them and had sabotaged Kaylee's efforts. She was throwing everyone she had fired under the bus. The chairman remained calm. He pointed out that Justin's documentation was industry standard and that Blake's unethical relationship had been the source of $100 million in revenue over the last decade. That's when the dam broke completely. Alina stood up and started yelling. Sam said it was shocking. She wasn't just angry, she was hysterical. She accused them of undermining her from day one. She screamed that this was a classic example of the patriarchy trying to tear down a powerful woman. She said they were all suffering from unconscious bias and couldn't handle her disruptive leadership style. Her voice got louder and louder, echoing in the silent boardroom. She started pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly. She said the company's real problem wasn't the financial loss. It was the deeply rooted toxic masculinity of the employees who had resisted her vision. She claimed there had been a coordinated effort, a sabotage campaign, led by the people who had left. It was a full-blown, paranoid meltdown. She was blaming everyone and everything except herself. The board just sat there and watched. They let her go on for almost 10 minutes, a long, rambling, incoherent tirade. When she finally ran out of breath, her face red and tears streaming down her cheeks, the chairman waited a beat. Then he looked at her, his expression unchanged, and said 3 words. "We are done." He turned to the rest of the board, all in favor of immediate termination for cause. Every hand went up. He looked back at Alina. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Please gather your personal belongings. Security will escort you from the premises." The story finished. Sam just stood there, looking shell-shocked. 5 minutes later, we saw it for ourselves. 2 security guards, guys we usually only saw at the front desk, walked into Alina's glass office. She was just standing in the middle of the room, staring into space. They spoke to her, and then she slowly started putting a few things from her desk into her designer handbag. They walked her out, right through the middle of the open-plan office. She didn't look at anyone. Her face was puffy and blotchy. The aggressive confidence was gone. She just looked small. As she passed the neon "Good Vibes Only" sign, it flickered. It felt like a punchline from a dark comedy. An email from the chairman of the board hit our inboxes 15 minutes later. It was short and to the point. Alina was no longer CEO. The board was appointing an interim leader from their own ranks. Kaylee's and Abigail's positions had also been eliminated. The next day, the office was like a ghost town, but a relieved ghost town. The beanbag chairs and collaboration pods were still there, monuments to a failed ideology. The company was in ruins. We were on the verge of bankruptcy. Many of us would probably lose our jobs in the coming months as the new leadership tried to salvage what was left. But the circus was over. The madness had passed. A week later, out of morbid curiosity, I did a search for Justin and Blake. I found it almost immediately. They had started a new strategic consulting firm together. J&B Solutions. Simple, direct, no pastel swoosh. Their website was basic but professional. It listed their services: technical infrastructure overhaul, enterprise sales strategy, crisis management, and right there on the front page was a testimonial. It was from the CEO of that huge national freight company, the client we lost after the 8-hour outage. It praised J&B for their unparalleled expertise and swift, decisive action in stabilizing their systems. I looked a bit deeper. I found an industry news article. Their first and biggest client was the multi-million-dollar account Kaylee had lost. Blake had brought them on board, and Justin was overseeing the migration of their systems away from our now unstable platform. They hadn't just survived, they were thriving. They were picking up the pieces that Alina had shattered and building something new and successful from them. They took competence and experience, the very things they were fired for, and turned them into a booming business. I looked around at the wreckage of my own company. I looked at the empty desks and the stupid neon sign. Then I opened a new tab in my browser and went to the Contact Us page on the J&B Solutions website. I wrote a short, simple email, and then, for the first time in months, I attached my resume.